Good morning, fellow science students. This is Michelle Disney coming to you live from Clayton, North Carolina, and I'm joined today by my good friend Jelly Beans. Jelly Beans is a sun conure, and he originates from the country of Brazil. Can you say hi, Jelly? Say hello. Hello, Jelly Beans. Hello, Jelly Beans. That's his hello. He's very loud. Okay, that's enough, buddy. So, since Jelly, who's flown away, is from Brazil, I thought that we would take a look at education as my current topic for you today. Education in Brazil and how they are studying science in particular, and possibly some ways that we as prospective teachers could incorporate science and other cultures into our own classroom. So, just wanted to give you a little brief history on the country itself and what they have had to do over the past decade to kind of incorporate science into their classroom. Now, as you may or may not know, they've had to work hard to achieve their economic stability over the past few years. And they have faced this really hard task of translating all this political and economic stability into programs that can improve the quality of life for millions of the students. Here, have a cracker. Have a cracker. Come here. There you go. Okay. Particularly the young people and the students of Brazil, how they could translate this into their educational system, because in the past, of course, looking back into like the 1950s, the teaching of science was considered very bookish, and there were no experiments or applications, very much like the American system of teaching science most likely in the past. The books emphasized experimentations and reasoning, and they were taught, but they weren't really hands-on type of activities. So in 1965, science centers were actually established into the teaching materials. And then moving along up into the 80s, they started to realize that, hands-on curriculum would be a better way of teaching science, but there wasn't any real programs, any real training or that type of thing. They weren't familiar with how to take on this task of doing this. So the Brazilian government instituted a plan for development of education that's called the Brazilian PDE. And what they did was, this was enacted by the current administration, and it outlined a broad range of executive measures aimed at rescuing the quality, reach, and long-term impact of the Brazilian education system, specifically for science and technology. So, the PDE, this was written back in 2008, and they talked about it being in its fourth year then. So, here we are in 2011, sorry. So, it would be in its seventh or eighth year now. But back in 2008, it allocated 19 billion reals, which translates into the American dollar $10,633,000,000 for education. Can you imagine what we in America could do with that kind of money for education? Almost unheard of. Anyway, they took on, or they actually hired a doctor. His name is E.W. Hamburger. Yes, that's his real name. And he was asked to head up a pilot group for the methodology of application designed to improve science education in primary education. He was very excited to do this. This started back in July of 2001, actually. He started in Sao Paulo and Sao Carlos, where it was applied in the classrooms during those first few years. He started with teacher training in Rio de Janeiro, and then moved that into the classrooms. The project was received well by teachers and students, as you can imagine. Just wanted to give you a quick picture. We'll take a little break from there of what a typical day in the classroom in Brazil would look like. They go to school from 7 o'clock in the morning until noon. Because they are in the southern hemisphere, the students typically go home at noon to have lunch. Lunch is the most important meal of the day there in Brazil. So most schools require students to wear a uniform. Their subjects that they teach are math, geography, history, science, and of course Portuguese, which is the main language there in Brazil, and physical education. Most schools in the past could barely afford to teach those subjects, which meant that courses like art and music and of course science and social studies were often left out in the poorer areas because they focused so heavily on writing and reading and those what they considered to be more important topics. We're back after a quick break. Sorry about that. Ironically, Jelly is infatuated with animal crackers. Anyway, back to Dr. Hamburger and his modules. He brought these modules into the teacher training, and then the teachers, of course, went into the classroom with these hands-on modules. So that was kind of how the program got started, and that in my resource page, which you'll see at the end of the presentation, is how the ABCs of science education got started by Dr. Hamburger. So how can we, as fellow teachers, connect and bring different cultures and different styles of learning into our classrooms? Well, as you may or may not know, NC State actually has a student teaching program, and last year the student teachers actually went to Brazil. So we can maintain a connection with those teachers and possibly have like email pals, that type of thing, where we can email back and forth, you know, what are you studying, what are you studying, maybe incorporate different lesson plans into each other's curriculum. We could compare common problems. Some of the current issues that are affecting Brazil right now are the deforestation of the Amazon basin, air and water pollution in Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, and several of the other large cities, land degradation and water pollution caused by improper mining activities, as well as natural hazards due to reoccurring droughts in the northeast, floods and occasional frost in the south. And then there's all kinds of international agreements going on that seem to be hot topics there, such as the Antarctic Treaty, the biodiversity, climate change, endangered species, environmental modifications, hazardous waste, marine dumping, nuclear test ban, the ozone layer. All of these are current topics that are being talked about in the Brazilian classroom. And many of those obviously sound familiar because they're very similar to what we study here and we face here in America. So it would be interesting to coordinate that with Brazilian classrooms and maybe do a joint lesson. And even through the use of technology, now we have Skype. The time difference may be a problem, but if it was recorded, you could even Skype into the classroom and the students could actually see and talk to each other, which would be just absolutely thrilling, I can imagine. Sharing food, recipes, that type of thing, kind of bringing Brazilian culture into the classroom as well, decorating, taking a look at their style of dress, why do they wear uniforms, those types of things into your classroom. So there's all kinds of ways that you can connect across the world now with technology the way that it is. It's just amazing what you could do. So to introduce Brazil to your students, I came up with a couple of books. The first one is Exploring Brazil with the 5 Themes of Geography by Jane Holiday. This is a children's book aimed for kids between the ages of 6 and 9, so good for your early learners. The other one is The Dancing Turtle, which features jelly beans. You can see there's a parrot actually up there in the corner, and that's a folk tale, so bringing you some fiction and some non-fiction. And then the last one that I have to show you today is Victoria Goes to Brazil, which may be kind of good to see how another young learner travels from this country and goes to Brazil and actually does some studying of her own in the country. So those are a couple of resources that you could use within your classroom as far as books go. So one of the websites I found had a really cool quote from a student teacher from Brazil that was actually student teaching in New York. And his name is Paulo da Silva, and he's at a school in New York right now. And they asked him what advice he would give to students from the U.S. who wanted to visit or study in Brazil. And I thought his quote was pretty cool. Shh, shh, shh. Let me give Jelly Beans another animal cracker. Here you go, honey. Here you go. Shh. He said, "Please go, because tourists usually find Brazilians to be the friendliest people because they delight visitors with their energy and joy. Those who go on to exchange programs to study in Brazilian schools and universities also find this experience extremely enriching to their careers and especially their lives. Brazil has such enormous contrast, socially and economically speaking, that only through a good immersion can someone start to understand this gigantic country of more than 178 million." So that was a quote directly from a student teacher from Brazil to New York that I thought was pretty interesting. So all kinds of exciting things going on in other countries as far as science education is concerned. I encourage you to maybe get out there and reach across the confines of your own classroom and see what's going on in the other countries and how they are studying science, and see how you can incorporate that into your classroom. It sounds like an exciting thing to do. So, this is Jelly Beans and Michelle Disney. We thank you for your time and hope you enjoyed this current event. Bye-bye.